Welcome to Wednesday Night Reviews.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Wednesday Night Reviews. Again, I'm your host, Konrad, and most certainly happy to have you here. So today I am going to review Moonshot Volume 1 and 2 by Comics, or Alternative History Comics. Truth be told, I wasn't sure how I was going to review these because, one, they're an anthology, so it's not a singular story following the same characters. Instead, it is many stories, and it's important to view them as stories, not superheroes, not legends or myths, not fiction, because these are the stories of the Aboriginal or Indigenous peoples of North America, Canada, US. So once again, I wasn't sure how to review them, because it's not like I can tell you the story of Batman or look at Klaus or look at something Jeff Lemire wrote. These are all very separate, different stories by Aboriginal artists and writers telling the stories that make up Indigenous culture. So I don't think of them like the Bible, and you shouldn't think of them like that, though you can take meaning from every story. As a Canadian, having lived here for about 3 decades, I can tell you all sorts of things about the characters of Jesus of Nazareth, a Middle Eastern carpenter. I can tell you about Siddhartha or the Buddha, who's an Indian monk, or even Ganesh, Indian gods. But I can tell you very, very little about the wonderful characters that helped form Indigenous culture and the stories that are told in these books. And that's why I think these are important. Because many of us growing up in North America, myself in Canada, but of course all across the whole continent, the Indigenous people that we're subjected to, that we get to actively see as white or even just plainly non-Indigenous, are typically characters like Tonto from the Lone Ranger, who's some sort of mystic or shaman, like possibly crazy person wearing all sorts of makeup and theatrical looking clothing, or we see them as something like a sidekick or a helper, or even as savage warriors and the antagonists. They're just these blanket, non-humanized characters that are there to kill people. And while that might have been, how some of the people felt when they first started colonizing the country, that's not Indigenous people. There are tons of people throughout the country that are still here, that are still Indigenous, and they always will be, because that's who they are. And they're here. And they're not erased. They're not characters in a story. They're not myths or legends or a wiped out people. They're really here. So please, that's why you need to read these, because they are important. They tell you of the stories of these peoples, and they are awesome stories. Some about creation, some about minor warnings about, this is how you should behave, this is why you should do this, or this is why you shouldn't do this. So these stories take place over many, many different eras, timelines. Some of them are sci-fi stories in the future. Some of them are fantasy stories. Some of them are taking the exact story in its original context and presenting it. And I think they're amazing. As mentioned, there's many, many, many different artists and writers, but all of this was edited and put together by Hope Nicholson. She's done both 1 and 2. And actually, if you pop on Kickstarter, you can find issue or volume 3 and support it there. Now, while I could try and review every story and tell you about every writer, this video would quickly become an hour long, and I appreciate that would be a little overkill. However, I did specifically want to point out the very first story that you ever come across in these books, which is called Vision Quest Echo by David Mack. And the art on this story, is phenomenal. It's lifelike. The coloring is gorgeous. The drawings are great because they combine very realistic drawings of this little girl who's the protagonist with her own drawings, with her mind, how she perceives things. And it uses great panel work to draw your attention and your eye around so that you can see the puzzle that she's trying to unwrap in her mind. And basically the story her story shows her life and her perspective, knowing her grandfather, who was a chieftain, and the amazing stories he could tell. And though she is mute, she's unable to speak because I believe she's deaf, she uses her words, her written word, to tell as many stories as she can. And this was a great way to kick off this whole anthology, both of them, and the third one to come, because it's about stories. And in this story, her family member tells her very specifically, "You are a fantastic storyteller." And she says, "Well, I can't speak." Because it's not about being able to speak, it's about being able to tell the story. Because you're passing on tradition, you're passing on knowledge through the telling of a story. And that's what these do. And that's why I think they're probably the most important comics I've come across, likely in my life. Highly important stories, especially as a Canadian or an American, that I think everyone should take the time to read. So once again, this is Moonshot Volumes 1 and 2, edited by Hope Nicholson, published by Comics, Comics Alternative History, both last year in 2017. And of course, we can expect Volume 3. It's on Kickstarter now. As of my last check, which was just earlier, they've raised $47,000 of $60,000. They've got 42 days to go. So if you can give even pocket change, whatever you can give to help this next anthology come out, it'd be much appreciated by myself, I'm sure by Hope Nicholson, and by all the artists working on it, and probably every North American who picks up this book just to learn, because they're fantastic books. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, this has been Wednesday Night Reviews. I've covered Moonshot Volume 1 and 2. Have yourself a great night.